Imagine you are standing before a heavy metal door. The year is 1973. You are in America, during the era of Nixon and the Vietnam War. The air smells of cheap antiseptic, stale tobacco, and anxiety. Your shirt is dirty. You haven't showered in 5 days on purpose. Your stubble itches. Your teeth are unbrushed. And you look like you just climbed out of a dumpster behind a diner. You approach the admissions desk. A woman in a white coat, without looking up from her papers, asks what the problem is. Your heart is pounding in your throat. You know you have to lie, but it has to be a very specific lie. You lean in and say quietly, almost in a whisper, "I hear voices. They're telling me emptiness, hollowness, a dull thud." 3 words, empty, hollow, thud. That's all you say. Otherwise, you are polite. You give your real name. Talk about your actual profession, your wife, and your children. You don't scream, tear at your clothes, or claim to be Napoleon or a CIA agent hunted by Martians. You simply complain about a strange, existential noise in your head. The nurse looks up at you. There is no doubt in her eyes, no suspicion. She picks up a pen and writes something in your chart. An hour later, you are sitting in a ward. There is a plastic bracelet on your wrist. Your chart is marked with a diagnosis, schizophrenia. You think, great, it worked, I'm in. You exhale, relax, and begin to act completely normal. You tell the doctors, the voices are gone. I feel great. I'm ready to go home. And that's when the real nightmare begins. The doctor looks at you with a sympathetic, patronizing smile. He doesn't believe a single word you say. To him, your normality is just another symptom. Your calmness is apathy. Your attempt to explain that it was all a mistake is a lack of insight into your illness. You walk to the door you came through and pull the handle, but it's locked. You turn to the orderlies and suddenly realize a chilling truth. You are no longer a person. You are no longer a father, a husband, or a professional. You are a diagnosis, and you're not leaving anytime soon. The most terrifying part of this story is that you are not alone. At this very moment, in different states across America, from sunny California to rainy Pennsylvania, 7 other people are doing the exact same thing. Among them are a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, an artist, a housewife, and a graduate student. They are checking into a wide variety of clinics, from luxurious private facilities where dinner is served on porcelain to overcrowded state hospitals where paint is peeling off the walls and sheets. No one on the staff of these hospitals knows that these 8 people are part of the most audacious, controversial, and dangerous experiment in the history of psychology. An experiment that was supposed to last a few days, but turned into a psychological thriller. They thought they were playing a game, but they overlooked one thing. In a psychiatric hospital, there are no rules to the game. The moment the lock clicks shut behind you, reality ceases to matter. All that matters is what's written in your file. The man who pushed the red button was named David Rosenhan. A professor of law and psychology at Stanford, he was charismatic, witty, and wore a perpetually ironic half-smile. To understand his motivation, you need to look at the calendar. The early 70s in the US was a time when authorities were collapsing like houses of cards. Watergate, the lost war in Vietnam, student protests. Americans had stopped trusting the government and the military, and Rosenhan asked the question, why should we trust psychiatrists? At that time, diagnoses were made almost by gut feeling. There were no MRIs, no genetic tests. A doctor simply listened to you and decided whether you were sane or not. Rosenhan suspected that psychiatry wasn't entirely a science. It was more of a system of social control, where the decision depended not on the patient's condition, but on the doctor's mood. But how could he test this? You couldn't just ask. A field experiment was needed. Rosenhan assembled his team. They weren't super spies or Oscar-winning actors. They were, perhaps, the strangest group of saboteurs in the history of science. 3 psychologists, 1 pediatrician, 1 psychiatrist, who was to be a mole in his own profession, an artist and a housewife, plus Rosenhan himself. 8 people against the entire medical system of the United States. The operation was prepared in the strictest secrecy. They chose 12 hospitals in 5 different states. The sample was perfect. From old, shabby state clinics on the East Coast to gleaming private sanatoriums on the West Coast, where treatment cost as much as a new Cadillac. If the system was broken, it had to be broken everywhere. Rosenhan's plan was brilliant in its simplicity, but that very simplicity made it so dangerous. The agents were given fake names and professions. Everything, both their childhood, relationships with their parents, life traumas, was to remain true. No extra lies to avoid getting tangled up. But the most crucial part of the instructions was the after moment. Rosenhan gathered them and said, "Listen to me carefully. As soon as you cross the threshold of the admissions office and the doors close behind you, you immediately stop the act." This was the key element of the trap. Faking insanity is easy. Any fool can roll on the floor and drool. But the task was different. They had to enter with symptoms and then behave like completely healthy, rational people inside. If the doctors were truly professionals, they should notice this instantly. They should say, "Hey, you seem fine. What are you doing here? Go home." The participants were nervous. They weren't afraid of being locked up. They were afraid of being exposed. In their diaries, they wrote that they expected to be found out in the first 5 minutes, that a doctor would look at them over his glasses, laugh, and call the police for fraud. Rosenhan even gave each of them the phone number of a lawyer, just in case of arrest. They prepared to be thrown out onto the street in disgrace. They practiced their 3 words in front of the mirror, rubbed dirt on their clothes, and didn't brush their teeth. They were ready for the humiliation of their failed acting performance. But none of them, not even the brilliant Professor Rosenhan himself, could have foreseen what would actually happen. They thought the hardest part of the experiment was getting in. Oh, how wrong they were. The first thing the pseudo-patients felt once inside wasn't fear. It was visibility. A complete, total erasure of their identity as a person. Imagine this. You approach a doctor in the hallway. You are polite. You are calm. You ask, "Excuse me, doctor, could you please tell me when I'll be allowed to walk in the garden?" In normal life, you would get an answer. Rude or polite, but an answer. Here, the doctor simply walked right past them. He would adjust his tie, look out the window, or talk to a nurse. But the patient simply did not exist for him. In his paper, Rosenhan called this depersonalization. One participant did a simple tally. He approached staff members with ordinary questions hundreds of times. In 71% of cases, the doctors just turned away and walked faster without saying a word. In another 20%, they would toss out a quick "good morning" and leave, ignoring the question itself. It was like living behind a thick glass wall. You scream, you wave your arms, but on the other side, they can't hear you. They see you, but not as a person, as an object, like a broken piece of furniture that needs to be fixed or simply moved into a corner. The living conditions eroded what was left of their human dignity. In one state hospital, the toilets had no doors at all. The reasoning was that the mentally ill needed constant supervision, so privacy was abolished. The participants described humiliating morning inspections, where orderlies would rummage through their personal belongings without a second thought, checking their beds. And here, we come to the holy grail of this experiment. The fact that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Remember, our heroes were acting completely normal. They socialized, read books, and helped other patients. And the doctors noticed nothing. To the psychiatrists with their degrees and credentials, these healthy people were hopeless schizophrenics. But do you know who saw through them? Who saw the truth? The real patients. It sounds like a scene from a bad comedy, but it's a fact from Rosenhan's report. In 3 of the hospitals, 35 real patients approached our agents and said, point blank, "You're not sick. You're not crazy." One patient declared, "You must be a journalist or a professor. You're checking up on the hospital." Think about that. The people society had isolated as insane. People with severe mental disorders proved to be more perceptive than professional doctors. They saw behavior, not a label. They saw a person sitting and writing in a notebook and drew a logical conclusion. He's here for work. The doctors, however, saw the same notebook and wrote in the patient's chart, "Patient engages in pathological, obsessive writing behavior." It was a paradox of perception. If you wore a white coat, you were blind. If you wore patient pajamas, you saw the truth. Rosenhan and his team realized they had fallen into a logical trap. And this trap had a terrifying quality. It was self-confirming. No matter what they did, no matter how normally they behaved, the system found a way to twist it against them. In psychology, there's a term called confirmation bias. It's when you've already decided the Earth is flat, and any photo of the horizon becomes proof of a conspiracy. In Rosenhan's hospitals, this effect was on steroids. The phenomenon Rosenhan discovered could be called the stickiness of labels. Imagine a sticker with the word "crazy" is placed on you. Now everything you do is viewed through the lens of that sticker. Here's a specific example from the experiment. One of the pseudo-patients, let's call him Bill, was an artist. He was bored in the clinic and started sketching in his notebook, drawings of the interior, portraits of other patients. A nurse noticed. Do you know what she wrote in her report? Patient sublimates his repressed emotions through art. Not, Bill is a good artist. Not, Bill has a hobby. No, it was a symptom of his illness. Another case. The participants often lined up for the cafeteria long before mealtime. Why? Because it was deathly boring in there. Food was the only event of the day. How did a doctor interpret this? Oral acquisitive symptom. Freudian nonsense that turned ordinary hunger and boredom into a psychiatric deviation. Even their life stories were rewritten. Upon admission, one participant honestly told the doctor about his life. He had a normal relationship with his parents, with some arguments in childhood, but nothing criminal. He later grew closer to his father. A typical human story, right? But in the discharge summary, the doctor turned everything upside down. He wrote, "The patient's emotional instability is rooted in an ambivalent relationship with his father during early childhood, leading to affective fluctuations in adulthood. A normal life was pathologized. The doctor was looking for a cause for schizophrenia, and he found it where it didn't exist, simply by twisting the facts to fit a preconceived answer." Rosenhan described a moment when he himself tried to prove his sanity. He stood in front of a mirror in the bathroom, rehearsing a calm, well-reasoned speech for the doctor's rounds. "Good morning, doctor. I'm feeling stable. My cognitive functions are normal." Then he caught his own reflection, a disheveled man in pajamas, talking to himself in the mirror of an institutional bathroom. He realized a horrifying truth. From the outside, he looked completely insane. His attempt to be rational in an irrational place itself appeared to be madness. It was a perfect trap. If you scream, "I'm sane," you are agitated and in denial of your illness. If you are quiet and compliant, you are depressed or apathetic. If you are friendly, it's a manic phase. There was no action you could take that would remove the diagnosis. The system was designed with a wide gate for entry, in the eye of a needle for an exit. And to squeeze through that needle, you had to admit you were sick. You had to agree with their reality to get your own back. In the 1970s, American psychiatry was experiencing a pharmacology boom. While patients in the 50s were pacified with lobotomies and ice baths, now thorazine, chlorpromazine, and stelazine stood guard. A chemical straitjacket. The experiment participants were prescribed pills. Lots of pills. In total, they were given over 2,000 capsules during the experiment. They were forbidden from taking them. Rosenhan strictly prohibited swallowing any medication, as no one knew how powerful antipsychotics would affect a healthy brain. It could cause real hallucinations, tremors, or loss of consciousness. A dangerous game of hide-and-seek began. The pseudo-patients learned to hide pills under their tongues. They would deftly tuck them in their cheeks while smiling at the nurse, then run to the bathroom. And there, leaning over the toilet, they saw another detail that perfectly described the system. Dozens of other pills were floating in the toilets. It turned out the real patients were doing the same thing. They were spitting out their medication en masse. The entire staff knew about it, but no one monitored it. The important thing was to check the box in the log, medication administered. The procedure was more important than the result. The atmosphere in the wards was saturated with latent violence. When the doctors went home, power shifted to the orderlies. And that's when Lord of the Flies began. One participant recorded in his diary an incident where a patient simply said to an orderly, "I like you." In response, the orderly beat him up, punched him in the stomach, threw him to the floor. Why? Because a crazy person had dared to speak to him as an equal. Another case. A nurse unbuttoned her blouse and adjusted her bra right in the middle of a day room full of male patients. She didn't care. To her, they weren't men. They were furniture. This complete lack of shame and boundaries showed how deeply the system despised those it was supposed to be treating. And where were the doctors during all this? Where were the saviors in white coats? The statistics Rosenhan collected are shocking even today. He calculated the average amount of time doctors spent with patients, including rounds, hallway conversations, and consultations. The result? 6.5 minutes a day. 6 minutes. You can barely hard-boil an egg in that time. And that was all the attention people whose lives and sanity hung in the balance received. For the other 23 hours and 54 minutes, they were left to themselves, the orderlies and their demons. In such an environment, the participants began to understand why people there truly went insane. Isolation, chemicals, violence, and indifference. Even a healthy person would start to question reality after a month of such a life. When the last of the 8 participants was released, he looked at his discharge papers. It didn't say healthy. It didn't say misdiagnosed. It said schizophrenia in remission. Do you understand what that means? The system never admitted he was sane. By their logic, he was and always would be a schizophrenic who was simply having a quiet period. That label would stay with him forever. With such a diagnosis in the 70s, you couldn't get a decent job, adopt a child, or vote. In some states, you were marked. Rosenhan gathered all the data, all the diaries, all the humiliating details, and wrote an article. He gave it a simple, devastating title, On Being Sane in Insane Places. And he published it not in some tabloid, but in Science, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world. It was like a bomb going off. January 1973. The article is published. The next morning, the phones in Rosenhan's office are ringing off the hook. The American psychiatric community is furious. Leading doctors accuse him of fraud, of unethical behavior, of destroying public trust in medicine. Of course, we hospitalize them, cried the critics. If a person drinks a liter of blood and comes to the emergency room, they'll be treated for a stomach ulcer. A doctor isn't supposed to suspect a patient of lying. But Rosenhan countered, if a person drinks blood, they will vomit, and the doctor will see it. In psychiatry, you see nothing but your own fantasies. The public was in shock. People suddenly realized that anyone, absolutely anyone, could be locked up in an asylum by mistake, and no one, not even the best doctor, would notice. It struck the rawest nerve, the fear of losing one's freedom. One very famous elite clinic on the East Coast was particularly offended. Its name is often omitted from the story, but it was a top-tier university hospital. Its chief physician publicly declared, what Rosenhan described might happen in some backwater institutions. But here, never. Our specialists are the best in the world. We can spot a faker from a mile away, and they threw down a challenge to Rosenhan. They said, David, send your impostors to us. We'll be waiting for the next 3 months. Try to fool us. It was a gauntlet thrown in his face. Rosenhan accepted the challenge. The second act of this drama was about to begin, and if the first was a tragedy, the second promised to be a brilliant farce. For 3 months, The atmosphere at that elite clinic was one of paranoia. The staff worked with double the vigilance. Every person who entered the admissions office was scanned with an X-ray of suspicion. Could he be one of them? Is he too calm? Or, on the contrary, is his screaming too theatrical? The doctors felt like characters in a spy novel. They identified Rosenhan's agents one by one. They were proud of their perceptiveness. When the experimental recounts period ended, the clinic's management triumphantly published their statistics. They announced that over the 3 months, 193 patients had been admitted. Of those, they had confidently exposed 41 impostors, 41 people sent by that upstart from Stanford. In addition, another 42 patients had aroused suspicion among the staff. "You see," they declared, "the system works. We filtered out the fakes. Checkmate, Dr. Rosenhan." Rosenhan held a dramatic pause. Then he issued a brief statement. His words were as dry as a gunshot. "During those 3 months," he said, "I sent not a single pseudo-patient to your hospital." Silence. A dead, ringing silence. Consider the scale of this catastrophe. 41 real sick people in need of help were dismissed by doctors as actors. Another 42 were under suspicion. Nearly half of all incoming patients were misclassified by top-tier professionals simply because they were expecting a trick. This wasn't just checkmate. This was flipping the chessboard onto the opponent's head. Rosenhan had proven a terrifying truth. A psychiatric diagnosis doesn't depend on the patient. It depends 100% on the context. If a doctor expects a madman, he will find a madman, even in a sane person. If a doctor expects a faker, he will find a faker, even in a sick person. The very foundation of diagnostics was revealed to be a fiction. It was like reading tea leaves, only instead of tea, human lives were at stake. This second experiment dealt a blow to the reputation of psychiatry from which it would not recover for decades. It showed that the emperor not only has no clothes, but that there was no emperor at all. There was just a person in a white coat, making guesses, and often getting them wrong. The Rosenhan experiment became a catalyst for tectonic shifts. In 1980, 7 years later, a new edition of the Psychiatrist's Bible, the DSM-3, was released. It attempted to remove subjectivity by introducing rigid checklists of symptoms. The U.S. began a massive process of deinstitutionalization. Huge mental hospitals were closed, and patients were released onto the streets. Whether this was good or bad is a separate, complex conversation. But Rosenhan played a key role. However, like any great story, this one has a but. In recent years, journalist Susanna Cahalan conducted an investigation and published the book, The Great Pretender. She unearthed Rosenhan's archives and found strange inconsistencies. She could only find 2 of the 8 real participants. The others remained shadows. Did they even exist? Or did Rosenhan, that brilliant showman of science, embellish the data for a greater cause? We may never know the whole truth. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. Even if Rosenhan made half of it up, he struck a nerve. He showed us a truth about human nature that extends far beyond medicine. We are all prisoners of labels. We look at a person, and in a split second, we tag them. Smart, stupid, dangerous, one of us, one of them. And once the tag is applied, we stop seeing the person. We see only our own expectation. The doctors in those clinics were not villains. They were just people caught in the trap of cognitive bias. They saw what they were trained to see. The story of the 8 people who said 3 words, empty, hollow, thud, is a reminder. A reminder of how fragile our reality is, and how easy it is to lose yourself if someone else, vested with authority, decides that you are unwell. So, the next time you're certain you understand someone at first glance, remember David Rosenhan. Remember how 41 sick people were sent home because doctors thought they were just playing the part of being sick too well. And ask yourself, what is written on your own label?